So today's going to be split into two different parts. So the first part is going to cover what is Web3, what has it achieved, what's emerging, the potential pitfalls, Mythbusters, and how to get involved. And then the second half will include a panel discussion with Rachel, the co-founder of Good Ghosting, a DeFi app which incentivizes regular savings, and John, co-founder of Float Capital, which provides tokenized long and short asset infrastructure, but also wildcards, which creates innovative funding models for sustainability projects. We'll be taking questions at the end of each section to make it like as interactive as possible. I will be repeating the questions because it needs to show up on the microphone, so don't be put off by that. So next. So I guess a lot of people maybe are thinking along these lines, like, what is this? So that's why we're doing this talk, like to actually give some more context to what this is. So first we're going to go over key terms. So first, blockchain, like what is it? So blockchain is a shared immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording transactions and tracking assets in a network. An asset can be tangible, so a house, a car, cash, land, or intangible, so intellectual property, patents, copyrights, branding. Virtually anything of value can be tracked and traded on a blockchain network. The technology is important because businesses and society run on information, and the faster this information is received and the more accurate it is, the better. So blockchain is ideal for delivering that information because it provides immediate, shared, and completely transparent information stored in an immutable ledger where all members share a single view of truth. And this is the underlying technology of Web3, cryptocurrencies, etc. And just to explain this diagram just a little bit, so a hash is almost like an ID of each block. And the thing is, to break that link between the hash and the previous hash, you have to take over 51% of the network, which makes it, so all of the nodes in the network have to reach consensus of 51% in order to break a block, and then the block before that. And so this is what this is like the trustless part of the blockchain network. So next, what is cryptocurrency? So it's also called crypto, and it's any form of currency that exists digitally or virtually and uses cryptography to secure transactions. Cryptocurrencies don't have a central issuing or regulatory authority. Instead, they use a blockchain to record transactions and issue new units. And then Web3. So Web3 is built on second-generation cryptocurrencies, of which Ethereum is the most dominant. This is programmable money, which allows a user to read, write, and own anything in the digital world. First-generation cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin only allow for simple swaps like gold. However, second-generation cryptos can create and transfer any type of value you can think of through something called smart contracts. So this is just a diagram. I'll just explain it quickly. So the first web was like read only, right? You go on to wherever it is, Wikipedia, for example, and you go read a Wikipedia page. Web 2 was read and write. It's what we have now. So you can send an email or upload a YouTube video. You can actually write to the web. And Web 3 is read, write, and own. So not only can I upload my YouTube video, I can now tokenize that and own that. Is it like an example? You can't actually do that on YouTube, just FYI. So many of you already know this technology is not new. It was actually invented in 1976 at Stanford University. But following on from that, there was a sprinkling of digital currencies in the 90s and early 2000s, with Hashcash actually being one of the most successful pre-Bitcoin digital currencies. However, not too dissimilar to AI, which was invented in the 50s, the use case for public key cryptography to be used as a store of value, digital value did not reach widespread adoption until the invention of Bitcoin. So, couple more. We added these last minute because, yeah. Anyway, so consensus mechanism. So consensus is a dynamic way of reaching agreement in a group. So while voting just settles for a majority rule, a consensus, on the other hand, makes sure that an agreement is reached, which could benefit the entire group as a whole. So a method by which consensus decision-making is achieved is called a consensus mechanism. So, and then the last bit is gas, so gas fees. Gas is the fee paid for executing transactions on a public blockchain. Each transaction on a blockchain requires a certain amount of computational power, and gas is the fee paid to miners for providing that computational power. So gas fees help keep the network secure, and they attach cost to every transaction. This prevents spamming or accidental infinity loops. And so this is another meme, because gas fees are pretty high on Ethereum, so it's just a joke. So any questions so far? No? Okay, cool. I'll keep going. So, not yet. Yeah. So first for a short history as well. So Bitcoin's success was largely due to timing. So on the 3rd of January 2009, the London Times ran a cover story titled "Chancellor on the Brink of Second Bailout for Banks." So this is the Times article. So this piece of text here was actually locked into Bitcoin's Genesis block by its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. Bitcoin was released at a time when governments and central banks' ability to safely store money was facing serious questions. And the events of the 2008 crisis meant people's faith in the governments and banks to adequately perform their functions were shattered. And the crisis caused people to ask, what do banks actually do with our money? So Nakamoto has also said, the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. So the core idea behind Bitcoin is it allows people to send money safely over the internet without the need for a central authority, or to guarantee or oversee their transactions. So it allows anyone, anywhere in the world to make and receive payments without a bank. The invention of Ethereum and the rise of Web3 has enabled the vision of digital currencies to reach even further, which enables not just the buying and selling of this like magic internet money, but also the ability to program it to do what you want. So a data affixed to the Bitcoin network transactions are generally only for keeping notes, like not dissimilar to like a bookkeeping ledger that you would have at the moment. But on the other hand, transactions on Ethereum can contain executable code which runs every time a transaction is made. So this is like sort of like a bookkeeper on steroids sort of thing. Next, Sarah will be talking about what Web3 has achieved.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to cover what has Web3 achieved so far. And these are some big things that you might have heard about, like NFTs, for instance. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. So NFTs are digital assets, so i.e. tokens, and they represent unique digital objects. So this could be a picture, like a JPEG file. It could be a song or even a data set. And they can also represent unique real-world objects. So think like a designer handbag or a property deed. So NFTs are stored on a blockchain ledger and they can be bought or sold. So the craze for NFTs actually started back in 2017 with the rise of a game called CryptoKitties, which is what you can see here. And these were little cartoon kittens that you could collect, you could trade, sell, and even breed. So each kitten is a visual representation of an Ethereum token. And the key thing about them is that no two kittens are the same. And this is because they're built using an Ethereum token standard known as ERC-721. So this standard is one of the very first examples of a non-fungible token, meaning each one of them is completely unique. Now, within a few weeks of launching, some of these were selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we've had many different NFT projects since, some of them selling for millions. Some of them you might have heard about are CryptoPunks, which are like little pixelated images of punks, and also Bored Apes, which are pictures of cartoon apes looking a bit human-like. So believe it or not, this is the best image I could find of the most expensive NFT sold to date, which actually sold for $92 million, and it was called The Merge, and it was created by an anonymous digital artist. And part of the reason why it reached such a high price was because it was actually sold in multiple units, which were called mass, and then it was kind of pieced together to form a bigger NFT. So it used to be the case that like an NFT just representing a picture, like a JPEG, was really all you needed for people to be interested and buy into it. But what's happening now is buyers and investors are looking for teams and projects who are going to deliver roadmaps for years to come. So for example, NFTs these days might give you membership to clubs, access to events, and also functionality within metaverse worlds as well. And some NFTs have also been used for crowdfunding public goods. An example here is Save Thousands of Lives, which sold for $4.5 million, and profits were allocated to the organization's program, which was aimed at saving newborn lives in South Asia. NFTs are also being used to fund the war effort in Ukraine as well. So, for example, Ukraine's selling a timeline of the Russian invasion as an NFT, and the proceeds are going to go towards Ukraine's army and citizens. As of March the 9th, Ukraine's actually received close to $100 million worth of crypto donations, and that's according to Alex Bornikov, who's Ukraine's deputy minister at the Ministry of Digital Transformation. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about DeFi, which is decentralized finance. And so we've seen this really emerge in the last couple of years, and it kicked off in 2020 with what was called the summer of DeFi, which is when we saw a lot of, I don't know why they always love to call it the summer of this and the summer of that. So there was an NFT summer as well, and who knows what summer we'll have this year. But this is where we saw a lot of DeFi protocols gain traction with users. So that was 2020. So basically what Bitcoin did for money, DeFi promises to do for the entire financial system. So it aims to allow you to do everything you can do in traditional finance without the need for a bank, and with one major difference, and that difference is decentralization. So what this means is that people who use the system can set the rules and collect the profits. So for instance, at the moment, some popular DeFi protocols will give you maybe around 20% interest on your savings. So I'm sure you can all compare that to what a traditional bank will give you at the moment. And the reason Bitcoin's been around for over a decade, but has only recently, DeFi has only recently emerged, is because it's not actually built on top of Bitcoin at all. It's instead built on Web3, which are the second generation cryptos like Ethereum, which Alex explained, which are programmable. So as mentioned previously, second generation cryptos can represent and transfer any type of value that you can think of through smart contracts. Currently, there's over $200 billion locked in DeFi contracts. Crypto assets are actually worth $1.8 trillion. We're at a point where the largest investment banks in the world are building their own cryptocurrencies and using their own cryptocurrencies. And also countries all around the world are creating and launching digital currencies of their own. So these are called central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDCs. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about DAOs. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard the term DAO. It was on our meme as you were coming in. But DAOs are basically internet native organizations that are collectively owned and managed by their community who work towards a common goal. So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. However, the vast majority of these are as yet neither decentralized nor autonomous, really. DAOs aim to be owned by their community, which usually anyone can join, rather than groups of shareholders, hence the term decentralized. They also aim to be governed by crypto treasuries, token-based voting, and code, rather than layers of management, hence the term autonomous. Many DAOs pay their contributors in their own tokens, which can usually be exchanged for normal money, which we call fiat. Currently, the biggest DAOs are in DeFi. One of these is called Uniswap, and it has around 250,000 different members. And these members can vote on decisions that the DAO takes, and therefore, essentially, this community collectively owns the organization. And DAOs aren't just impacting finance, they're impacting multiple industries, which we'll talk about a bit later, but this includes science, art, data, AI, green economies, publishing as well, and also real estate. There's quite possibly a DAO for anything you can think of, including Pizza DAO or Rare Pizzas, something like that. It's about ordering pizza, basically. And next up, I'm just going to talk briefly about culture before we move on to what is emerging. So we thought this was quite important to mention because Web3 has a language of its own, as you've probably already noticed, and it can be very overwhelming when you first get involved. The mindset of the culture of Web3 is embodied by the phrase WAGMI, as shown by SpongeBob here. And it's essentially an acronym which stands for "We're all going to make it." So although this first became popular as a phrase about getting rich, it came to embody a key difference between Web3 and the traditional startup mindset. So traditional startups operate in an individualistic culture of zero-sum games where winners take all, and businesses are incentivized to act adversarially towards one another. Web3 instead is collaborative. The idea is if one of us makes it, this paves the way for others in the space to make it too. And similarly to this, Web3 protocols are almost always open source. It's very much frowned upon to not have an open source protocol in Web3. And this is also reflected by the grants given in the space, who often stipulate that you have to open source your code as part of receiving that grant. So before we move on to the next section about what is emerging, are there any questions about this section here that we've just covered? Great, okay. So next section, what is emerging? So Alex is going to talk you through a little bit about public goods.
So in economics, is this mic okay, by the way? Is the sound okay? Okay, it's all good, okay. So and in economics, public goods are goods that are both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. A good is non-excludable, so I'm just going to have the words up there because they're long words, and sometimes when people hear them, they can't take them in. So a good is non-excludable if it is possible to prevent or exclude non-paying customers from experiencing or using it. And a good is considered non-rivalrous if its consumption by one consumer does not prevent simultaneous consumption by other consumers, and if the cost of providing it to another individual is zero. So something that is rivalrous are seats in a theater. Like if I give it to the last person, another person can't join. Fresh air is non-rivalrous. So the perfect example of a public good is open source software. Other examples include free education, a healthy planet, access to law enforcement, clean air, and drinking water. The funding of public goods are a benefit to all society and are often provided for by governments and funded via taxation, as they are too important to be left to free market capitalism. However, public goods provision by governments is usually inefficient. This is mostly because coordination complexity around allocating funding fairly and efficiently. So you're probably wondering why I'm talking about public goods in a Web3 talk. So Web3 public goods protocols like Gitcoin raise money efficiently and provide a neutral way for individuals to fund and build public goods. Web3 brings benefits of transparency, coordination, and decentralization to public goods funding. Gitcoin is able to efficiently coordinate funders without needing to trust centralized entities, such as traditional crowdfunding platforms. Furthermore, Gitcoin employs a quadratic funding model, which scales funding in a democratically efficient way. So as you can see here, I'll explain the diagram anyway. This is achieved by matching every single donor's contribution with the deep pockets of large foundations. So the idea is that if a wide group of people signal the value of a public good through their willingness to pay, then it makes sense to prop them up with institutional funding. So for example, if I was to vote with $10 and UCL was to vote with $1 million for different things, we would have the same voting power because the way that it's one-to-one, right? I've voted and they've voted. But actually what you're signaling that it's one-to-one. And so then therefore UCL's funding amount would actually be less than, and I would get more. So it's pretty cool. You can go try it out if you go on Gitcoin and go vote for some stuff. So far, actually, Gitcoin has raised $55 million in funding for open source projects. They're really interesting. So another exciting development is retroactive public goods funding. This was actually proposed first by Vitalik Buterin, who's the creator of Ethereum. So an exciting development on this front is the introduction of the Optimism Collective last month, actually, whose purpose is to produce strong public goods infrastructure for optimism, which is built on Ethereum, to increase its utility and therefore create a useful economy for all to build on. So if you look at this, it's like this circular economy thing, like let's all build each other up. And I think it comes back to like the culture of like WAGMI and like we're all going to make it. It's like, how do we actually build things to lift us all up rather than this like zero-sum game? And that's just a meme, which I quite like. Anyway, you can see here how the funding, so this is actually a tweet by Vitalik, the creator of Ethereum, talking about, so he got in a bit of trouble because he was like, didn't like apes It's like the Bored Ape stuff, the NFTs. And he said, I don't hate apes, I just want them to fund public goods. So although there's some exciting developments in public goods funding, considering the massive amount of money in the ecosystem, we still have a long way to go, and many projects which would benefit the whole ecosystem still struggle to get funding. So next, Sarah's going to talk about refi.
Thank you. So this is something that's definitely emerging at the moment. So regenerative finance, known as refi, lies at the intersection between crypto, climate action, and biodiversity loss. So the idea is that to meet decarbonization targets by 2030, current rates of decarbonization need to double. And to avoid a mass extinction event, we need to sufficiently protect and restore our ecosystems. The refi movement argues that achieving these goals requires a radical rethink of how our current economic system allocates value. Now, voluntary carbon markets face many challenges that blockchain technologies claim to solve. For example, the tokenization of carbon credits creates a use case for carbon as a collateral asset. Blockchain also addresses issues around transparency and accountability, which prevents double counting and greenwashing. So Toucan and ClimaDAO are two organizations in the space that have demonstrated the extent to which refi can affect traditional markets. So over 5% of the voluntary carbon market credits has actually been tokenized via Toucan since October, and the floor price of carbon has been raised by 3 times as a result of the demand triggered by ClimaDAO. Now, this rising demand for on-chain carbon stimulates the capital to scale carbon dioxide removal technologies and to develop scalable measurement, reporting, and verification systems. So next, I'm going to talk about another public good that we're particularly passionate about, and that Web3 is currently revolutionizing, and it's science. So scientific knowledge is said to be the epitome of a global public good, but it's often locked away behind paywalls, and data is siloed in institutional databases. Decentralized science, known as DeSci, aims to enhance scientific funding, unleash knowledge from silos, remove the reliance on profit-hungry intermediaries in science, so this is things like publisher conglomerates, and to increase collaboration across all of science. So in this way, DeSci is helping science to reclaim its role as a true public good. So science-focused blockchain initiatives date back to around 2015, but they didn't actually coalesce into a larger movement until last year in 2021. We believe that this is the first DeSci meme, which was created by Alex in September 2021, when we were part of an open science DAO called Absentia. You all know what a DAO is. But at this point, no one really knew what we were talking about with this meme, and a lot of these likes came later when we retweeted it. So the current landscape of DeSci, it's a group of loosely connected DAOs, which is mostly focused on biotech, but it's now forming a very coherent and connected movement to reimagine all aspects of science. This year, there's been an explosion of interest in DeSci. So we published an article in Nature at the start of this year. A16Z then commissioned us to write this explainer article, and the term has gone viral. Key themes in DeSci are the use of smart contracts to cut out intermediaries and instead to mediate directly between stakeholders. For example, one aim of DeSci is to remove the need for journals to act as a trusted intermediary for peer review and knowledge curation. DeSci also aims to remove the need for centralized funding bodies to make decisions about research funding allocation. And there's also the issue of, there's also the possibility of immutable permanent storage of science on the blockchain to combat issues of censorship. Another theme in DeSci is ownership. With DeSci, scientists own their work. And currently this is often owned by your university, the funding body, or the journals that you publish in. So this ownership enables scientists to share in any later profits that are generated from their work. And this is all brought about because of provenance tracking of intellectual property and data through the blockchain. The hope is that this will help create more self-sustaining scientific ecosystems where scientists are free to pursue curiosity-driven research. Later profits from scientific output can also be shared with other people who contributed to the process. So, for example, patients who took part in studies, or maybe citizens who contributed to funding in the first place. This is the premise behind the most successful DeSci DAO so far, called VitaDAO, which is funding longevity research through NFTs, which represent scientific IP. Now, this IP, and therefore any resulting profits, are owned by the DAO members, so the members of VitaDAO itself. So Alex is just going to talk about data, AI, distributed compute.
So modern society runs on data, and AI extracts value from data, and the more data leads to more accurate AI models, which benefits businesses and societies. The largest beneficiary of this phenomenon in our current digital landscape are companies that have access to both vast amounts of data and AI expertise, most notably big tech. So in contrast, specialized AI companies have excellent expertise, but are starving for data to train their algorithms. Then you have typical enterprises, which have less AI expertise, but are drowning in so much data they don't know what to do with it. I personally have experience with the latter. So therefore, we have a situation where data and AI are controlled by few, but their implications on society are unprecedented, and their reach is controlled by a few, but their reach is wider than any single government has ever had before. I mean, if we look at Cambridge Analytica, that's like one example that comes to my mind, like super easy, but you can think of other ways that these large tech companies have control over our lives that governments actually don't. So, the goal of distributed compute and federated learning is to spread the benefits of AI through using different tools which help to equalize the opportunity to access and monetize data. There are some big players in the space, include IPFS and Filecoin, which were born out of Protocol Labs. And you also have decentralized data marketplaces, such as Ocean Protocol. And there's some other really interesting players coming up, like Algavira AI are doing federated learning, Nevermind.io create data sharing for enterprises. So anything, this is a super interesting space. We're actually building a project that's looking at decentralized data and how to share that in a safe way. So ask us more questions on this later because we love it. So any questions about what's emerging? And yeah. Nope. Okay, cool. So next are potential pitfalls, which is always a great topic when talking about Web3. So ignoring the technology for a second, blockchains are an optimal platform for speculative boom. And therefore it's of little surprise that bad actors and speculators converge on it. So the first one I want to talk about is the ICO bubble, because it happened. We've seen the aftermath of it. It's a nice thing to look back on. Well, not so nice, but anyway. So in 2017, 2018, the market was made up of speculators who didn't really care about the underlying technology, and they just wanted a ticket to bet on and get rich. This led to an unprecedented boom in Bitcoin and altcoins in 2017. And this was followed by the fall in the price of Bitcoin by about 65% during the month of January and February 2018. However, we should not conflate cryptocurrencies and the underlying technology with the ICO bubble, which was a speculative phenomenon that converged on it. The ICO bubble was something that happened to crypto and not something intrinsic to it. Many of those building were simply motivated by creating a new financial system, and they continued to build even after the 2018 crash. Examples are our guests, John and Rachel. Both have been working in crypto for a really, really long time, and they continued building throughout this whole period. So a lot has evolved since 2018, and there are now many world-class teams, well capitalized, to build, scale, and evolve blockchain technology. And tens of millions of people in the world who now understand decentralization, consensus mechanisms, and private keys. So Sarah's going to talk a bit about scams and losses.
Thank you. So people losing money in crypto frequently makes the news, and I'm sure we've all heard lots of stories. Some of these are purposeful scams, whereas others are simply the result of bad code or immature governance, and sometimes it's difficult to tell one from the other. The most recent of these was a disastrous NFT release by called Other Deed, which was by the same team behind Bored Apes, called Yuga Labs. So Other Deed NFTs represent a plot of virtual land in the metaverse. Now, Yuga Labs made 55,000 of these. This is an example of one here. And they launched this a couple of weeks ago. What could possibly go wrong? The sale was so popular that it sold out immediately, which made Yuga Labs 320 million. but it also crashed the Ethereum network. So each purchaser not only paid $5,800 per NFT, but the demand was also so high that gas fees, which are required to mint an NFT, as Alex explained earlier, gas fees soared to as much as $7,500 for some people. So just for a bit of context, gas fees are usually maybe around $20 when you mint an NFT, but it does fluctuate depending on how busy the network is. Now, for those people who didn't actually pay enough gas, maybe they didn't have $7,500 in their wallet to pay the gas, their money was actually lost to the network. The team has since reimbursed all those who lost gas during the mint, but the community remains very disgruntled at having to pay such high gas costs in the first place for the NFT itself. So many blame the way that the smart contracts were coded, whereas others have suggested that the launch was actually planned to fail, so that the team could advertising launching their own blockchain, as you can see in this tweet here. We're sorry for turning the lights on Ethereum for a while. It seems abundantly clear that ApeCoin will need to migrate to its own chain in order to properly scale. We'd like to encourage the DAO to start thinking in this direction. So this is just one example of another day in the crypto world. Other recent headlines which hit the news was Squid Game, which was in November, where this new squid currency and the related online game was released. And it was actually said by some investors to just be an elaborate scam. So investors claim that the developers disappeared after the currency skyrocketed in price and they seemingly cashed out with $3 million. So this is known in the industry as a rug pull, and it's why it's really important to always research projects as much as you can, and particularly the team behind them before you get involved in investing in any NFT projects. So are there any questions on this section before we move on to myth busting? Cool. Okay. Next up is myth busting. So some of you may be sat there with a couple of questions. What about money laundering? So there's a common narrative that crypto is used for money launderers and drug dealers. However, research has shown that transactions involving illicit addresses in 2021 represented just 0.15% of all crypto transactions. While according to the UN, it's estimated that between 2 and 5% of global GDP is connected with money laundering and illicit activity. So some people have suggested that criminal activity using cryptocurrency is actually smaller than with traditional currencies. And finally, last but not least, what about the environment? Well, there's good reason to be concerned about the impact of digital currencies on the environment. So some currencies, including Bitcoin, employ a consensus mechanism that uses computational power to verify transactions, which is known as proof of work. And this mechanism requires huge amounts of energy. However, not all cryptocurrencies use such energy-intensive mechanisms for validation. Ethereum is implementing a new mechanism later this year known as proof of stake, where miners will pledge coins to verify transactions. It's estimated that this will reduce energy consumption by over 99%. And many other chains, for example, Celo, already use this proof of stake mechanism. So that's the end of that section. Are there any questions on the Mythbusters before we move on to how to get involved? Yes.
How does something like Solana reduce the gas fees for transactions in comparison to Ethereum?
Oh, that's a great question. So how does something like Solana reduce the gas fees in comparison to Ethereum? And I don't actually, it's different. Which one is consensus? Proof of stake. Yeah, so it's proof of stake. So essentially that's what I mentioned before about it. It's the consensus mechanism. Instead of having the miners all compete by performing these like large computations, they stake their tokens instead in these staking pools, and then they use that to verify their transactions. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
How does the UN or any other organization estimate the number of percentage of money laundering?
That's an absolutely great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm definitely going to go look it up. I'm not sure how the UN does that. It's probably something around looking at crime statistics and working with the police and those kinds of things, but I'll definitely look up how they do that because it's a really good question. And also, I don't know how they, when it comes to the illicit addresses involved with cryptocurrencies, I don't know how they identify those either, but yeah, sort of government consultancies, I think, sometimes. But yeah, I'll definitely look into that. Yes.
Maybe like maybe a bit out of the field, but like at the beginning, like things like NFTs were sold to artists like, oh, you finally will have full ownership of your art and will be able to cut the middleman. But in reality, like you see with many things like the apes, for example, there's many of those examples. It's more like reiteration, never-ending reiteration, or one graphic that is not even the high quality. So the argument about NFT helping art to sell and be the new tool for art is actually a bit taking the joking. I mean, really, no fine artists really sing. I mean, some have, but what's your position about the quality of the art making a nosedive with NFTs?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question for everybody. So the idea is, it was originally sold, you're completely right, that NFTs will flip it all around so that artists can like finally own their own work and get paid for the art that they create. And I think what you're saying is that it's not actually delivered on that promise, and you think the quality of the art has actually gone down as a result of that. I suppose the quality of art, it's the type of art. I think we see fashions with NFTs and like, you know, the cartoon images, etc., like that. And I think a lot of that is around the community who are buying the NFTs. So I think traditional art markets, it really depends on the country though. So like in the US, I think there's a definite relationship between high-end art galleries and NFTs, and they have much more of those like one-to-ones. Whereas I think what you tend to see on the internet and what gets publicized a lot are sort of the pixelated profile pictures, and their sort of tastes around that are very different. But I do think it's like a cultural difference, like in terms of, I mean, art's always been about personal taste, right? And I think every generation probably doesn't necessarily.
It's also stolen art very often that just gets changed and in different ways, and sell like 100 pieces on the base of one stolen piece of art.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite an interesting point, because it will be stolen because it was never previously put on a blockchain. So they've stolen it and then put it on a blockchain. What would be interesting is in 5 years' time, if all art is put on a blockchain, then you can't steal that art ever again, because there's a pointer that says at this point in time that art was put there, and this art is from this person. And then 5 years later, if someone tries to steal that art, they can't, because they can then prove the provenance of that art. Does that make sense? So I think a lot of the problem is that it's so new that it's almost like you're building on greenfield land, basically. But it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over time. And as Sarah said, like the tastes, a lot of the things that get bought, like a lot of the art that gets bought, is for people that are crypto native. So it's for people who are CryptoPunks. People relate to that because they've been working in the space for a long time. They relate to that sort of punk like era, like non-conformity that speaks to them. So I think for maybe traditional artists, they see it as like not great art, but actually for people buying it, they really enjoy that art and they like that art. So it's like personal taste. So yeah.
But what do you think about the fact that sometimes like people buy a piece now because it's popular on the market and it's a good investment, more of that art really speaks to me. They buy a collection just because it's what is likely to bring profit more than the art.
Yeah, that happens in the real world as well. So yeah.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a quick comment. Even with the traditional fine art, you can still make copies of fine art and have them not really good quality. In the same way that in the virtual space, you can create copies of the same artwork. It just has that additional instrument of blockchain behind it that proves the sort of originator, essentially, the copyright or the IP behind it. A quick question: what are your thoughts about something like Decentraland?
So the question is, what are our thoughts about Decentraland?
I haven't personally sort of experimented with that side of things yet, so I don't really have an opinion on it. I know some people absolutely love it, but I think in anything in this space, it's just follow your own tastes is always the first rule, like, and do your own research. Like DYOR is another acronym meme in the space, because you should always do your own research and not just buy things because people say, oh, it's gonna like skyrocket. Like as long as you like it, and that's the main reason you're buying it, and you research the team, so you can be pretty sure it's less likely to be a scam, because you can never guarantee these things. Then I think that's the kind of advice I have about it. But yeah, and also just to say, like, I think it's interesting as well because a lot of people talk about like replications and like copying of art, and it's like Andy Warhol loved that. Like he created like whole like factory like conveyor belt type systems to create replicants of art, and that was like one of the things that he loved doing. So I do think it's going to look really interesting like in history when people look back on this time, like in art history, because this is part of art history that we're forming now, whether you like it or not. You know, whether the older people like it or not, the young people like it or not, it's going to be a page in the art history book, and I think it's going to be a very fascinating one, is my personal opinion on that. So cool. Any other questions before we move on to how to get involved?
Yeah, how to get involved.
Yeah, cool. And sorry, we might not have managed to repeat all questions and comments into the mic for the recording there.
Any other questions? No. Okay. So how to get involved? I've got a QR code which have come back into fashion since COVID, which I love because they're so easy. So we've put together a Notion page, just a little page, and it has so first is it not working? Damn. Well, I'll give you the website.
It works on a different phone.
Maybe it's some.
It does work.
Yeah.
Does it not work?
Maybe it's the angle.
If you go
It works
closer.
now. Yeah, I think it's the angle.
Okay. I was like, how am I going to forward you this website? I don't know, because it's very long. So on this QR code, there's first how to download your Web3 wallet. So that would be really good because we have a POAP for this event, which is a proof of attendance protocol, which is a little NFT that goes in your wallet and it says, I attended this event. And we love POAPs. My dad actually stalks my POAPs and he texts me about them. So he's like, I can see you have a new POAP. I'm like, yeah, I do. So please scan this and look at that. And then there's also a part on grants funding. So a really cool thing about this space is if you build on certain protocols, you can apply for grants to build things. So whether that's like funding your startup or whether it's you want to build some, like you want to fix a feature in for a protocol, whatever it is, you can look at the request for proposals. You can also apply to open grants and a lot of these things. So there's a good database about that. There's also, what else is there? There's also further reading from this talk, which is super cool. So all the stuff we've mentioned, hopefully we've linked it there. There's a place so you can contact us. And there's also a survey to give us some feedback. And so on a final note, I just want to reiterate that we're so early and this space is rapidly evolving every day. And an analogy I love is like, imagine we're like building the internet with the internet. So that's what it's like building Web3. And this is from one of my favorite tweeters, David Phelps. And it's like thinking of the future of blockchains is like Bitcoin or Ethereum as we know them. Is like sitting in a movie theater in 1927 and thinking the future of film will be silent and black and white. So we're at the very, very beginning and there's lots to build. And then this is the QR code again. And this is your POAP. So please go find the POAP. And it looks like this, the page. So yeah. Oh, and now we're going to do a lovely panel with our guests, Rachel and John. So please stay for that. I don't know if we should get... Before we start, is there any questions? No? Okay, cool. I just need to find this. So we have John and Rachel here, which I introduced them briefly, but I'll ask them to introduce themselves again. And also how long they've been in Web3. So first, John.
Thank you very much. So a little bit about myself, John, and I've been now learning for the first time about Bitcoin in 2016, which was pretty cool. And I read a little bit about it, and I was studying computer science at the time in South Africa. And I realized it was really cool, and it was actually pretty aligned with what I'm doing. And from then on, in 2017, I started tinkering around in the space, and I guess really building on it full time, maybe I guess since about 2018. And yeah, it's a really fun space, lots of ups and downs.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me okay? My name's Rachel. I've been working in this space full time since 2018. I've known about Bitcoin since about like 2014, 2015, but didn't do anything with it then. And to be honest, like when I was, I have like a non-traditional route into tech, so I did a boot camp. I didn't study computer science at university or anything, but I was doing a boot camp in 2015, and at that time I was going to events and hackathons, and there was a lot of talk about, you know, Bitcoin, and also Ethereum was coming out around that time as well. But to be honest, at that time it sort of annoyed me because I was just trying to get my head around like APIs and databases, and it was like way too much. So I had a bit of an emotional reaction to it, which I actually think is probably not that uncommon. Like it is quite overwhelming when you are like coming to it first, and there can be a pushback. But I actually started to get into it more in 2017 when I went to a meetup, and somebody just put it to me that Bitcoin had never been hacked, and by this time I was working as a developer, so I thought, okay, this has actually really just got into my mind and I can't stop thinking about it. So I'm actually going to like start to kind of investigate the tech a bit. Bought some tokens. It was the beginning of 2017, so that was quite nice with the old ICO boom at the time. Didn't sell any, so like it went up and it went down, and then I was in it for the tech, so got a job in the industry then as well.
I think we'll give a quick intro about us as well, because we haven't really done that. So I'm Alex. I probably started working full-time in crypto about a year ago for the decentralized science company, which I made the meme. And before that,
You did a lot more than just to make the meme.
Oh yeah, I
She
did
make the meme.
I did make the meme, but I was really proud of it. And then before that, I was probably interested in it back in 2017. I just graduated from a history degree, so it's like super non-traditional. And I really wanted to work with like it was called crypto, then it wasn't called Web3, and somebody told me that I needed to have more technical skills. So then I did a boot camp as well, different one, but also in London. And then 2018 happened and there was no jobs in crypto. So I started working for a consultancy. So I was working as a software engineer and then a data engineer, and it's where I met Sarah. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. So I remember hearing about Bitcoin. I have no idea what year it was, but I remember trying to Google like how to buy a Bitcoin, and a Bitcoin was way much more than I wanted to spend. So I was like, oh, well, I missed that train. And then it was around 2017. So my brother's a cryptocurrency writer, and I used to read his articles a lot. There's actually one in the further reading. He does a really good essay, Everything You Need to Know About Crypto. So we've added that to the reading section. And I guess I fell down like the crypto rabbit hole. I think it was called crypto then, not Web3. Yeah, it wasn't Web3 then. When I was, it's okay. So I was finishing my PhD at UCL. I did a PhD here in cognitive neuroscience, and I was, I guess it was like a nice distraction when I should have been writing my thesis. I was like spending hours and hours on Reddit learning all about Ethereum and all those things. And then I decided to leave academia and went to work in tech. So I started working a consultancy, fintech consultancy on the R&D team, because they had a scheme where they took PhD grads and trained you as a consultant. That's where I met Alex. And then I was working in JP Morgan after that for a couple of years. And then it was around this time last year, I decided to go sort of like full-time Web3 when we did a peer-to-peer learning course called Kernel. I think you're both part of Kernel, right? Yeah. So it's Kernel with a K.community. I think that's also one of the reading. And it's how I kind of got much more involved, and it's how then we met the co-founder of Absentia, and we joined Absentia, the science that I was talking about. And yeah, now we're doing our consultancy phase 3 and our wearable project Links, which Alex mentioned earlier. Cool. So I'm going to ask you all the next question. So in the beginning, what was the biggest hurdle to understanding blockchain, crypto, Web3, or whatever it was called at the time? So what was the biggest hurdle? Maybe we'll go first to you, Rachel, this time, just to mix things up.
I suppose I kind of touched on this already in my intro. Like, I think for me, it was probably like an emotional thing. Like, I was already deep, like, it's pretty, as you'll probably also testify, when you do a boot camp, it's a lot of knowledge in a short amount of time. And then when somebody starts talking about decentralized ledger, you're just like, no. So I think that was probably the most off-putting thing to me. But then when I got into it, like, I think just when there's that moment where you start to go down the rabbit hole and then somehow you can't just stop thinking about it. And then I think you kind of just somehow learn a lot and make a lot of mistakes. Like, I literally lost the first crypto that I bought because I was also like, Bitcoin's too expensive, I'll buy a Litecoin. And then I was like, I must get a wallet. So I'm going to download a wallet. And I thought they worked like normal wallets. You could just put a Bitcoin and an Ethereum or whatever. Like, you've got your pounds and your euros. But I sent my Litecoin to my Bitcoin wallet, never to be seen again. So that, yeah, that me literally losing things on my first investment. But it didn't really put me off. I think by that point it was more of an experiment. So I think it was the initial, like, kind of overwhelming jargon. And like, I think particularly when you have when you're trying to understand things technically, it is a lot. So I think just breaking it down is probably the biggest challenge.
I really like to learn by building with things. Like, reading is great, but if you can build something, you really sort of have to know how it works to be able to build on it, right? So I was interested in trying to build some things on the blockchain, and the tooling was just very bad back then and janky. Like, I would open up my computer, get out my VS Code, and just like trying to install the modules and like get the code compiling. That was like half of the problem all of the time. So man, that was a really big barrier to entry. Like, many people weren't working on it, so it was just hard to even get going, and like get to square one to write the first line of your code was a hurdle. So that was, I would say, my biggest barrier. But I think what's really cool now is that's a lot easier.
Cool, thank you. That was really fascinating.
Do you want me to answer that?
No, there's no.
Oh yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it.
Or you can answer if you want.
I think it's off. I think the microphone's off now, but I can do this. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Oh, is it back on? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you're both builders. If you can remember, what was the very first idea you ever had for a project?
Oof, some really bad ones. Like, right in the beginning, the first ideas at some of the early hackathon, like we did in 2017, it was at a bank, and it was literally just like, try create a token. Like, there wasn't even really much of an idea behind anything except like, let's try get the software to work and like make our own cryptocurrency. So that was really just day one. And then we try to actually use zero knowledge proofs to do a voting app, and that was really hard as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so one of my first things was a voting app, not zero knowledge proof though. There were some very silly ideas around like gambling crypto kitties and like a cat that could get a hat for the crypto kitty and you could lose its hat. Probably the most ridiculous thing. That was back in like beginning of 2018. But you know, silly ideas are fun. I think they're part of the creativity.
Okay, great, thank you. So the space has changed a lot since you both started working in the ecosystem. What would be your advice now to anyone looking to get involved?
Yes, John also mentioned, things are a lot better in terms of the developer experience. I still don't think they're perfect. So I think you do need to go in with a slightly different mindset than if you're using more established technology. Probably the documentation still could be out of date. There we go. Is that working now? Yeah. Cool. So yeah, like if you're developing, like documentation is much better, but like still always just dive into Discord and ask questions. I think where this industry makes up for some of its lack of developer experience is in its openness. So you can normally get hold of somebody who works on a protocol or a community member who will help you. So that really helped me. Yeah, just ask a lot of questions and it's you quickly learn, although there's always more stuff to learn. So it's kind of like a never-ending job.
Many of us probably know YouTube's one of like the best ways to learn anything. And YouTube is great now with crypto. There's lots of people building cool stuff on YouTube. So if you go into YouTube, one person I can recommend is Patrick. He does some really cool things, easy to follow along. If you just even Google like Patrick blockchain Python, I'm pretty sure it will come up. So yeah, I enjoy that.
Yeah, and Discord, if anyone doesn't know, it's just like Slack. It's like a tool. I think it was originally made for gaming, and it's used for like every crypto project. And also hackathons. Like hackathons are amazing. So I've linked ETH Global's hackathons in the reading list, but yeah, if you can find crypto hackathons, like they're awesome. And I'm just gonna talk because I don't know if this is on. Anyway, crypto hackathons, and there's prizes, and like the people, like the co-founders of the actual builders on the protocol are there at these hackathons, and you can code with them to build your product. So that's cool. Also, I think we're throwing a hackathon soon, so come along to that. But anyway, it's more of a thought hackathon, so keep your eyes out. So next question. What do you think are some of the key differences between running a Web 2 and a Web 3 startup?
Web 3, I guess, it's just a very fast moving space where I think things can fall in and out of favor very quickly. And because that's the case, I think your planning has to almost be a lot more near term, and you have to be extremely comfortable with uncertainty a lot of the time, which can be really tough. It's not as sort of fixed. Things can change a lot in 3 months, and you might need to make real big pivots and changes in 3 months. So it's just being okay with the uncertainty and just being able to react. So yeah.
Yeah, just second that. It's kind of almost a little bit like dog years, where like 1 year in normal world is like 5 years in crypto. We spoke about this at lunch actually, and I did mention like Web3 and crypto is very cyclical, and there's like upsides to that. So like in terms of like funding, there can be times where it is actually easier to like raise funds if you want to build a company, which is important. But then also there on the flip side, there's times when it gets harder again, and I think we're kind of going into a little bit of a bear market. I don't know how long that will be for, but I think also you build you kind of have this community aspect in Web3 and crypto, which is I think quite unique, where you have a Discord where you're building this product for people. People have probably bought in and got your token. They're very like emotionally invested in your product, which can be amazing when things are going well, and you can get like a lot of support. And I think it's what gives this kind of industry a lot of like energy and vibrancy. But you also have to make sure that you like manage expectations and you do deliver, because I think, you know, as we all saw with the ICO boom, lots of promises, not so much delivery. And for some of those projects, frankly, they just raise too much money, and that is a problem in itself. And I think because everything there's a level of transparency that you probably have in Web3 that you don't have if you're building a more traditional like web product, where people can kind of easily see how many dollars are locked in your protocol, how many addresses are interacting with your smart contracts. So that can present challenges, but yeah, it's also a benefit as well. And yeah, you've got to learn, like everything is changing all the time, so it's constantly learning as well. It's important to also take some time out, because people do get burnt out being on Twitter, being this and that. Like if you also get caught in I know yesterday there was a whole kind of crypto meltdown. If you're caught in the eye of one of those storms, you've got to, self-care is important. So like just making sure you take some time out and do some deep thinking and restore as well.
Thank you. That's great advice. So the next question we wanted to ask you is, what has been your biggest success? So with Good Ghosting, we help our users
basically build better financial habits. We incentivize them to save regularly. So we've helped our community save over 2.5 million in crypto. So probably the biggest thing that I'm most pleased about. We've recently hit the number one. Well, a couple of times we've hit the number one app on Seller in terms of daily users, which is awesome as well. But also, it's just been phenomenal as me to be able to, kind of as a female founder, be able to build a team across the globe. We've got 9 people working for us now. Fundraise and go on this journey. So I think it's actually afforded me some very unique opportunities that I don't think would be available to me, or especially during like pandemic. Like now you can, like I say, we have a team. My whole team, we met part of this program Gitcoin Kernel that we all took part in. So we're on 4 different continents. None of us live in the same country, and we've been able to build a team, and that's really been awesome, I think.
I think I would say one of the biggest successes is the fact that what I'm doing every day, like I enjoy doing it, which is really, really cool. It's such a creative industry where now for 4 years, I've never been like, wow, this is starting to get boring. I'm like doing the same thing. It's, man, every day there's new opportunities, new things to build on top of. And it's kind of like this ever evolving Legoland where like there's always more stuff to build on other Legos, and the more everyone else builds, the more fun, because the more like space for you to build stuff on top of them. So that's just really, really cool. And yeah, I think one of the biggest successes. Yeah.
And I think it's also really cool to note that you guys still do hackathons. Like you both have companies, but you both still like do hackathons, and that's sort of like the culture is like you just keep building, even if it's not your own startup. Like even if it's not the startup you're focusing on, it's still building. Like, and like if you have an idea, and it's just like keep like to just explore that sort of aspect. Okay, next question. What do you think are the main risks for the industry going forward? So for example, think that sometimes there's too much speculation and not enough building, and this happens in a bull market. So that's when like token prices are really high. So yeah. But now coming into a bear market, so maybe it will be less.
I mean, there's all the obvious ones, but something interesting, like yesterday, one of the big stable coins losing its peg, like that's really fascinating, looking at those types of things and trying to see, what kind of ramifications does that have on the industry as a whole when some really big projects start to struggle and maybe go underwater. Maybe there's a few challenges there, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think there's quite a lot of obvious challenges.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's not great when people are kind of losing money, and like obviously there are kind of risks around like the regulatory environment. That's like a whole topic of itself. And I think it's always kind of, it is interesting because I think we just can't really be sane about money. So like we always like either go completely like down on it, and actually in bear markets actually probably when like most interesting stuff does get built, but then like we do seem to go crazy again when the price goes up, and I think kind of like just navigating that can be a bit tricky, and we also like how is that journey going to unfold when we have like more and more like millions and billions of people getting involved? That will be interesting.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so the last question that we have for you both is, what excites you most about the space for the future?
Yeah, I think it's just like this kind of concept of like, which John mentioned, like it's this kind of whole ecosystem of like Legos that you can build on top of, and it gets richer and richer, like certainly compared to like when I was getting into space in 2017, there was no stable tokens, there was like DeFi wasn't a thing, like, I mean, CryptoKitties had just come out, but that was pretty much it. So it was actually quite hard to build anything. There wasn't really much you could build apart from like an ICO. And I think now we're just seeing like the evolution of so many different parts of this like space that, I'm kind of in DeFi, so kind of up to date with that. But like NFTs is a whole space that I don't even know what's happening in like many corners of crypto now. So it's interesting to see how that evolves. And like, you can look at a protocol, like, for example, we build on Aave, like we know Aave, we have a good relationship with them, but like you don't need that. You can just actually just start building on that. And as more of these kind of building blocks are out there, I think we're going to get more and more like creative uses and things evolve beyond like what we see now.
Yeah, I think same thing. You know, we had like the tip of the iceberg when the internet started. We couldn't even conceive all the really fun things that, you know, we take for granted today. And I think it's the same greenfields opportunity. There's going to be so many fun things to still be built, and it's great because it's by no means fully explored. So that means there's a lot of opportunity for all of us creators to, you know, think and try make our mark on it. And, you know, there's just a lot of opportunity. So I'm excited to see what does get built, because I think there'll be some things that we haven't even thought of right now, which is going to be cool to see what that is in 5 or 10 years time or 2 years time.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for these guys? Feel free to ask. Hi.
I have a question. I have this theory that the reason why crypto is doing so well is because of this element of experience that it has created around it. So communities, for example, the culture, the decentralized element of stuff, the security, the single source of truth. Do you reckon that actually crypto is likely to replace fiat currencies that we currently have? And do you reckon that governments are likely to actually adopt these cultures that we have built around the crypto space as something that they want to now sort of adopt within their own operational sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to hang on the mic.
It's okay. Just
Yeah.
say it. You have to say it into that though. They don't touch it. Just talk.
So just to repeat the question, I'm not sure if you guys can hear. So the question was if we think governments are going to adopt cryptocurrencies, and then the second part of the question was replace fiat. If cryptocurrencies will replace fiat, what do you guys think?
Just the mic's not on, but it's just that thing. Just speak into the small one.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think no one knows, and every government's different, which already brings a very complicated aspect into the equation. As you know, some governments are accumulating Bitcoin and have some ideas. Some governments are outlawing and banning these. So I know a little bit about economics, not too much, but I know monetary policy is a really important tool that a lot of governments use to, you know, bring about certain sort of economic things they would like to achieve, and they would be extremely reluctant to give that up. So I think they would be happy to adopt crypto insofar as it can provide certain efficiencies for them, maybe settlements, those types of things. It can really improve that. But in terms of, you know, sort of a country becoming a DAO and like you have these many tokens and you vote on things, I don't think it's going to go that far. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the huge barrier is whenever you're coming from fiat to crypto or crypto to fiat, that bridge, the government's always going to be involved and able to regulate that point. So, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose the government will always probably want to exist in some kind of like centralized element to kind of regulate and control things. But having said that, there are actually a lot of experiments, and I believe there will be adoption in kind of central bank backed digital currencies. So I think we'll see elements of it, and I think it can actually offer like a huge level of transparency, which could actually be very beneficial. I don't think government's going to come out with like wag me DAO, as fun as that would be. It's kind of all of that, but I think it could be really, even if it's not a fully public ledger, I think, you know, whatever form it takes, there's a lot of kind of government institutions that need to talk to each other, and also getting that to a way in people that they have some transparency. I think we will see it in some form.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is, when we're working on DeFi projects, how should we navigate the legal compliance complexity there? And the second question is, any tips on how we're building kind of the early adopters of any DAO or any Web3 projects? How do you go from, like, this space is so crowded, how do you get your first adopters?
So the question is legal complexity around DeFi protocols and early adopters for your DAO. Is that correct? Yeah. Which one wants to take it first?
Legal, it's a big topic. I'm actually going to decline to talk on that because this is like, you need a lawyer for this, basically. It's quite a complex area. But like, yeah, like, see if you can get a lawyer and then get some advice on that. Yeah. Easier to talk about kind of getting your earliest users. So basically, what we did is we kind of like we built it like we had a product kind of ready to go. We did some sort of there is a huge component to like the space which is around like internet culture and like tapping into like this is why memes are brilliant and actually are really important. But we did some like community challenges and we did a meme contest. We had like a quiz that we shared. We tapped into all of the ecosystems and communities that we were already in. So we did a Gitcoin grant. Actually, that was a really good way if you want to. I wouldn't do it now since we've raised fundraising, but like if you're building something early on and you want to get a feel for like, will this get traction? You can actually put it up as a Gitcoin grant ahead of like you having a full product. We raised a small amount of money for that, which was very useful for like company formation. But I think more than anything, it gives you a little bit of validation that you're actually building something that people would like to see. So Gitcoin is great for that. Hackathons are also great. If you go to Hackathon and build something, you already have a community that you're tapped into. They'll share it on Twitter. You'll meet people there. So I think it's all about kind of tapping into those communities. And I think in this space generally, like been building my product for like just like the last year and a half, and like the most successful way that we've grown is by doing collaborations. So we did a collaboration, done it with like lots of places in the space, and we're in a nice, it's not so zero sum, so there's always an opportunity to do like an NFT share or a token share, do a community call together, and I think this has been by far and away the most successful like growth tactic that we've used.
So I'd say I think, you know, you'd be surprised how many people are willing to try out what you're doing and what you're building, as long as it's interesting and it's fun. If you're just going to fork Uniswap v2 and it's another AMM with a different front end, you know, people aren't going to be that excited. You know, everyone's played around with Uniswap, so if you send someone the link, they're going to be like, well, what's the difference? But if you genuinely like, you know, building something fun, something new, you'll be surprised by how many people are like, wow, that's cool. You know, I'm happy to like try that out, see what it does. If you have a testnet link or something, again, these early communities, maybe at a hackathon or part of a Discord, if you can share it with 10 close friends or people that you've met at the hackathon that can all play around with it, that's a lot of feedback to go on and get yourself going from there. And from there, if it's cool and it's good, they'll tell their friends. And before you know it, I at least think that organic way is the best way to go about getting some early users and adopters, and they'll give you enough insight to, I think, take the product to the next steps it needs to be taken to before you know, go do other things with your product. So yeah, people are happy to try things out. So that's really cool in this space.
Do you have any comments on the legal side of it that he asked about DeFi legalities?
I think Rachel covered it pretty well, so I'll leave it to what she said on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's really cool. Actually, I am not like a technology like person. I'm not like always familiar with this thing, so it's really like informative for me. So my question is actually this: like Jonjo and
Rachel.
Rachel, like you guys have mentioned, like this is an industry that will actually induce the uncertainty. We need to avoid that, and also it's fast moving and everything. And so from my perspective, when I think about it, if this industry is such fast moving in the future, and even now, like in the future, so for people who are not familiar with this kind of things, is that another kind of centralization of knowledge or things? How do we deal with that? Is it possible, like decentralize this
concepts. Because when I was like listening to this, I was like, I can't like catch up some concepts.
Yeah. No, I think I might take this one actually. Yeah, that's actually, I'll repeat the question. So, is the issue with I guess what you're touching on is because the space is so new, there's only a finite amount of people. The early adopters in the space are the ones that are building it, and that's a small group of people. And yes, it's a problem. So I think one of the biggest problems I see is like the same group of people being members of loads of different DAOs, and so building what seemingly are different products, but actually are all coming from the same people. And hopefully that's what these talks help with, is getting more people involved and to actually like get involved, like go visit Pizza DAO and buy pizza through. I don't even know what Pizza DAO does, but whatever you're interested in, like try and find a DAO for that, because what this needs is more people, and different thought processes as well. Like I think one of the biggest issues with tech and normal tech is that we have a lot of technologists building, and I think one of the issues that could be an issue for Web3 is we have technologists building systems for the world, and we don't have specialists in that space. So we need people who are economic specialists and international development specialists and artists and all these different types of people to build in this space, and not just like, I'm a technologist, I can say that, like not just technologist, because I don't know everything. And I'm trying to design data ethics, and I can't design data ethics. I never studied data ethics. So I think it's a really good point, and I think the only way to solve it is to like everyone get involved. There we go. Yeah. But anything you guys want to add?
No, I
No.
just
All good.
second that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any more questions? No? Nothing? You sure? Okay, cool.
Great, fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone, and don't forget to claim your POAPs. And thank you very much, John, and Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
for having us.